this is Colleen McGee welcoming you to another episode of Fort Riley, the podcast. Today we're talking about toxic algae blooms. This is a fairly regular occurrence in the region surrounding Fort Riley, and for the first time in the recollection of our environmental experts, an on-post lake tested positive in initial quick testing for toxic algae. Here to explain about algae in area lakes and what to watch out for is Derek Moon, the Fort Riley Directorate of Public Works Environmental Branch Chief.
Algae blooms are a common thing in the state of Kansas. Across this entire region, there's the algae bloom at Moon Lake is at one severity level. The algae bloom at Breakneck Lake or Beck Lake or any of the other pond, Vinton Pond or any of the other deals is a whole different thing. There's two types. Algae is in every pond out there, and not all algae. Just because you go to a pond and you see it, that doesn't mean you need to be worried at all. That being said, everyone needs to educate themselves on which blooms are hazardous and which ones are not. When there is a hazardous bloom, we will put out a warning. This is the first time in anyone that is here's knowledge that we have actually had a toxic algal bloom like what's going on at Moon Lake. There is algae in every other pond out there, but the one at Moon Lake currently is toxic. Milford Reservoir is notorious for its toxic algal blooms. We're assuming right now that it's the same cyanobacteria that is common in Milford Reservoir. We will know sometime this week. We've got stuff being tested. We'll know more of the species of the algae and stuff by the end of the week. It did rapid test positive for toxicity last Friday, hence the warnings to keep you and your pets out of there. When there is toxicity in the water, people need to stay out of the water. Don't get it on your hands. Don't come into contact with it. It will likely make you sick to your stomach, like a flu bug would, like a stomach bug virus would. Those types of toxins, there is no known treatment for animals. So definitely keep your animals away. And if you see something even suspected in a pond, report it to us. We'll look at it, but keep your pets away from those types of water bodies. The best thing you can do is get on KDHE's website, and they explain in very implicit detail how to assess and what to look for better than I can do.
If somebody suspects they see something in one of our on-post ponds, who do they call?
Call the environmental office and leave us a voice message. Call 785-239-6211 and leave a voice message, and we'll get a hold of somebody to test and get information out. One thing to keep in mind when these blooms are going on is as these blooms fizzle out, for the lack of I'm not coming up with a technical term, as they fizzle out and die in the body of water, when they start to decompose, that eats oxygen out of the water, depletes the oxygen, and these already oxygen-depleted lakes, as temperatures rise, water can hold less and less oxygen within its system, and then when these organisms decompose, that uses more oxygen, and that will create fish kills, just because of oxygen depletion, and they can't survive when there's no oxygen in the water. That happens some at Milford Lake, where this happens every year in Milford. It's beginning there now pretty heavily. You'll start to see more warnings from KDHE coming out, but something to be aware of, that just because you see dead fish in relation to these algal blooms doesn't make the fish unsafe. The fish are still safe to eat. That's not getting absorbed into the meat. The reason they're dying later on is indirect association to the algal blooms, typically due to lack of oxygen in the water. It's not actually the fish being directly impacted by the toxicity of the algal blooms.
Derek, thank you for helping us understand more about this issue in our region. Remember, all ponds and lakes have algae, but not all of it is toxic. You can find out more about how to spot potentially concerning algae and learn the status of area bodies of water by going to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment website at kdhe.ks.gov. If you suspect an algae bloom that needs investigated in a pond or lake on post, call the environmental branch and leave a message at 785-239-6211. Thank you for listening to another episode of Fort Riley, the podcast.